We need to have a system where the public are told what the sentence is, how it has effect, and that's point one. And I think it's very important that when the judge says you go to prison for 6 years, you serve half, and then you'll be released in the community, is that sentence is carried out. And we don't change it halfway through. That undermines public confidence.
Let's focus on Andy Burnham's headache over the early release schemes of prisoners, and it shows no sign of going away. Today, the Daily Mirror reports, the Mirror on Sunday, reports violent and sexual offenders who will be released under the scheme will be confined to zones of no more than a few miles to try and ensure victims' safety. This comes after domestic abuse campaigner survivors accused Andy Burnham of cherry-picking prisoners to exclude from the plans. Now, my next guest spoke to the Times Whitehall correspondent Katie Tarrant about how to fix the problem with our prisons, and he believes we can't talk about prison capacity without tackling how long people are sent away for in the first place. Welcome Lord Thomas, who served as the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales from 2013 to 2017. Hello there, Lord Thomas.
Good afternoon.
Now, I've read the article that appears in today's Sunday Times, and it seems that you were wanting to have a more open discussion about a very emotive subject, and that is how long serious offenders should be in prison, how long minor offenders should be in prison, because every crime has a victim, and these victims' voices should be heard. What do you think should be happening if you would change anything about the early release of these prisoners, which is happening this autumn?
First of all, there's the short-term problem which the government has, and I don't think it's got any alternative than to do what it's doing. The problem is fixing it for the long term. This problem that's arisen has been entirely foreseeable, but both main political parties have been quite content to increase the length of sentences across the board without actually being prepared to spend more money on building more prisons and employing prison officers and probation staff. And therefore, what they've done just doesn't add up in the long term. And what I'm concerned to do is people should have an honest discussion. Do you want to pay for more prison places and more prison officers and more probation staff and keep sentences at the length they are or increase them? Or is the public not prepared to pay for this, prefer to spend money on something else? But you can't run away from this difficult question, which is a difficult question in many areas of our public life.
It costs £60,000 a year to keep a prisoner in prison. And there is also evidence which suggests that some people who go to prison for shorter sentences may come out more willing to commit crimes by what they've learnt when they're inside. We're talking about releasing some of these prisoners who have to come out due to overcrowding in the next few weeks, putting them on GPS trackers to ensure that they don't breach any geographical boundaries. Are things like this creative solutions which could work in the long term? It's rather than just banging people up for longer, can you see other solutions which might work?
I think you can look at providing the system works and is resourced, because modern technology as to where people are at a particular time is highly accurate and impressive, as you know from your own mobile phone. And as long as you've got a system that can track where people are, and you have those in the probation service or otherwise monitoring where people are, and if they don't do what they're told to do, arresting them swiftly, then the system can be made to work. It's a cheap solution in the sense that you don't need to build prisons, but it's not cheap in the sense that it's cost-free. There are resource implications, and the problem with the criminal justice system is that it is short of resources.
And the country is short of money, so we perhaps ought not to expect huge amounts of resources being piled into the justice system. And as a journalist who's worked around a lot of the civil justice and criminal justice system for most of my career, I know that there is a constant feeling that there's not many votes to be won in sort of keeping the justice system as perhaps well funded as the people who work in it would like it to be. And that's been easy for politicians to start draining resources away to elsewhere. But let's assume that there isn't a vast amount of money that is going to be pumped into the criminal justice system and the prisons network and probation services. You talk in the interview about the possibility of releasing elderly prisoners, people who are lifers but who are now heading towards the end of their lives, perhaps don't necessarily represent so much of a threat as they did in the past. And also there's this constant debate about whether or not putting women in prison is such a wise idea in the first place. Could you give me some indication of your personal thinking about the sort of people who should be in prison and the sort of people that we perhaps should think about getting out of there so that they're not a drain on the exchequer and can be rehabilitated?
Well, the first thing the Prime Minister has said, he wants to deal with those who were sentenced to imprisonment for public protection. And that is a no-brainer. This is an injustice that needs to be remedied and should free up around 2,500 places. Secondly, we have to look at the elderly population. Now, many of these people have committed horrendous crimes, and I don't think one should underestimate the seriousness and the effect that release will have on their victims. But on the other hand, if you run out of space and these people are dangerous, you need to have an honest conversation with the victims as to seeing whether this is a category of person that you should release. Now, women is a different problem. On the whole, there are most women who are sent to prison are sent there because either they've committed an offence repeatedly and there is no other thing to do with them. And one asks, in the case of those, would not some kind of residential day release centre be better? And we've tried, the government has looked at this, but never been prepared to go ahead with it. To the women who have committed really serious offences, and there are some drug dealers, people who've committed murder in certain circumstances or aided and abetted serious sexual offences, then those have to stay in prison. But there are two definite categories of women, and I do think we need to look at whether we can deal with those who fall into the first category I mentioned without in any way affecting those who really do deserve to be in prison.
Do you think the media has a role to play in this? Or is the media simply reflecting the public, and the public think that if you've done something quite serious, you need to go to prison, and that there isn't much nuance or black or white in that? But you're talking about opening this up and having a serious conversation. It can't just be between politicians and the judiciary. It needs to be with the British public as well, doesn't it? We need to think about what prison is for. But that's a very difficult conversation to get started.
It is, but it's one we've avoided. And by avoiding it, we've got ourselves into what I regard as a much worse position, which is having told people X will go to prison for 6 years and he'll serve 50% of that. And then you then have to go to the victim and say, well, I'm very sorry, he's not now going to serve 3 years. He's only going to say 2 years or 18 months. We need to have a system where the public are told what the sentence is, how it has effect. And that's point one. And I think it's very important that when the judge says you go to prison for 6 years, you serve half, and then you'll be released in the community, is that sentence is carried out. And we don't change it halfway through. That undermines public confidence.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that final point.
We have to do it because the government's got no alternative. I'm sorry.
We'll leave it there. Lord John Thomas, who served as the Lord Chief Justice for England and Wales from 2013 to 2017, thank you for your time.